This is Media Sales Mastery, the podcast for media sales professionals. In each episode, we bring you information, insights, ideas, and interviews from some of the industry's top thought leaders. Head to mediasalesmastery.com to help pick the topic and guide the show.
This is Media Sales Mastery, the podcast for media sales professionals. I'm your host, Jamie Wood, and our guest today is Bradford Power, owner and director of Switch On Your Sales, an international sales training, coaching, and consulting business. The topic we're covering off is a very simple one, pitching and presenting, one of Brad's key areas of expertise. Now, as well as being a presentation skills trainer, Brad is actually an in-demand corporate presenter and a keynote speaker. He's just returned from a recent assignment over in Asia and New Zealand as well, so we're very lucky to have him in the studio today. Brad, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
It's great to have you on the show because I think fear of public speaking and presenting, it's almost universal to most people that it's something that petrifies us. And I think even seasoned media salespeople, more often than not, going into a big boardroom or going in and having to present to even a small group of people can find it quite intimidating. Why do you think it is the case that people are so afraid of presenting and pitching?
Look, I think that's a great opening question. I think it comes down to the different dynamic. You know, there is a specific difference between, having a conversation with a client, because a lot of media salespeople are naturally confident. They've got good conviction in what they're promoting. And so I think with that confidence, they can leverage off that to have a typical client conversation where you sit down with 1, 2, 3 or 4 people and the conversation flows as a two-way street. I think there's a different dynamic to presenting or pitching, particularly if you're standing up in front, because you're not having a conversation as such. You're more really convincing or persuading an audience. And I think because of that dynamic, when you're up there, you feel that difference. There's maybe a level of scrutiny where the audience is looking at you. They're really thinking, are you convincing me? Are you persuading me? And I think because of that, it creates a little bit of a different sense of atmosphere. And so naturally, even if a media sales representative is confident, they've got natural conviction in a client conversation, there is a different dynamic when you get up and you're presenting. And I think sometimes people, they might confuse naturally, hey, I'm confident when I'm representing a media organization in front of 1 or 2 clients. But you really feel that difference, I think, even in your body, even in your mind, and it can impact your voice. When you get up there to present, there's a different dynamic. So I think that's fundamentally one of the reasons why people find it, more challenging or confronting or intimidating than just generally having a conversation with a client.
It's a fascinating insight because I think you're right. When you're sitting down having a conversation, you are naturally able to be more attuned to the inflection, the tone, the pace. This other person is feeding you back real-time information. When you're up presenting, often to multiple people, you're relying on non-verbal cues. You're relying on facial expressions. You're relying on your own confidence in what you're saying. And I believe you're having to actually make a few guesses on the fly without that sort of real-time data. So that's a really interesting insight. I never thought of it that way. Well, look, this is a topic we're going to get into today because in terms of the people listening to this podcast, we've spoken to 5 or 6 people now. When we've spoken on this podcast format and I've said, what are the skills required to be, a master of media sales? Presentation skills are consistently in the top 3.
Wow. Okay.
So let's jump in first and foremost, though, to a little bit about who you are, Brad. So we're going to go into the first 5 now.
The first 5.
So Brad, talk to me about your first 5 years in media. Where did you start?
So interestingly, I actually started more at the university level because my brother's 12 years older than me. So he actually, and he's still today, works for a major TV network. So he started as a cameraman and then worked, kind of got into the whole news area. So growing up, he really inspired me in terms of the whole media industry. And so I went to university and I did a double degree. I did a journalism degree. I was thinking I was going to go that angle. But then I also decided to do the whole media, advertising, marketing angle. But what's interesting, and I think, it resonates really nicely with this whole podcast theme, because a lot of what I've read about, this great podcast is, how do we equip media sales professionals when there's no real set qualification that you need for this industry, particularly, in getting leverage in the first 5 years, right? So fascinating quick story about my transition from uni to getting my first full-time job. It was actually in an advertising agency in Brisbane. But funny enough, the biggest thing that really confused me about entering the media advertising space was that the person who hired me actually had like a diploma level kind of in marketing, and I had the 2 degrees, right? So right there, the message was, hey, you don't necessarily need a university qualification or a certain level of qualification. What really spoke to me in that moment was work experience and networks counted for a lot more than your, the qualification that you had. And so that was a really strong message that, opened my eyes as soon as I stepped in. And then after the advertising agency, which is really interesting about that, first of all, before I move on from that, the advertising agency, when I came in, that agency had just lost a major government contract that was a core, base of their revenue. And so I was part of the team to try to turn that around. And I was exposed to how do we construct a really good pitch to win back that really critical contract. So over the period of time I was there, I was part of the pitch team, and I got to learn some really critical principles around how to pitch persuasively to win work. And so we were successful in regaining the contract.
And it seems like that early exposure to pitching for business in agency land and working with sales teams, and now what you do, obviously working with media companies all around the world, which is a really interesting, I suppose, skill set to have, because you're absolutely right. It's apparent to me that a lot of industries require people to have good presentation skills, but maybe none more so than media organizations. And I think the reason for that, as you were saying, it's about competitive edge. It's about being persuasive. It's about bringing your brands to life. Oftentimes, what we're selling isn't tangible. It's very much bespoke to the client. Look, I think what you've covered off here in these first 5 years is sets a really nice framework for the audience to know who you are and a bit about you. But I guess the question I would have is, what skills do you think somebody needs to master in order to be a media sales professional?
I think it starts with mindset, particularly in media sales. There has to be that level of desire, that real drive, and also that level of commitment, the willingness to do the hard things. Because it's an industry that requires a lot of energy, a lot of passion, a lot of hard work. And so, there are sales roles out there where you can get away with just, being average Joe, and you might get some level of results. But I think in the media space, that mindset piece is so crucial to long-term, success, the level of desire, the level of commitment. And because we're not robots, we're human beings, I think it takes that perseverance, from a mindset perspective. And I think leveraging off that mindset, the skills that I think is critical for a media sales representative to master, I think it's kind of the broad range of, they have to be able to hunt. They have to be able to open doors. There's got to be that business development angle, definitely. But they also have to be able to farm and grow more business from customers they've worked hard to win. But then interestingly, there also has to be that account management piece, that relational maintenance piece as well. And interestingly, statistics show that if you look at the broader range of sales, people in general around the world, it's not common to find the ability to hunt, to farm, and to account manage.
You're absolutely correct.
In one person. And so I think the message, a positive message out there for anyone wanting to build a media sales career, is that you need to work at it, in terms of the hunting, the farming, and the account management. Stereotypically speaking, there's exceptions to the rule, but generally if someone's really good at hunting, they can also be good at farming, because there's more of that growth proactive element, but they tend to not be as good at account management. They're not great at that kind of,
the
detail level, the administration, the service orientation. Whereas if they are good at the account management, they tend to be, they can work with the farming, but they may have a little bit of natural weakness in that real proactive hunting, go-getting element. So I think, the level of awareness that people need to have around, okay, for me to be really successful, I need to understand where is my natural strength out of those three, and where are the ones that I might need to fine-tune a little bit. Apart from those three fundamentals, hunting, farming, and account management, I think what's critical more and more these days in the information age, and to, because a lot of our clients that we're talking to, they've already researched us, they've looked at us, they've looked at our competition. It's the consultative selling skill, the ability to really ask great questions, open up the client, position yourself as that trusted advisor, really seek first to understand what do they need, what do they want, what's most important to them, and then to be able to really tailor that solution to what they're needing and wanting, rather than just regurgitating the same old solution, because that's easy selling. That's, in fact, I label that as lazy selling. So I think the anchor actually to the skills that has to be mastered is consultative selling. The ability to ask good questions, actively listening, really engaging the clients. Because what's happening in that moment of that skill being executed when you're consultatively selling is the person or the client is not just buying your media package or your media solution, they're buying you. Because you're showing that you really care. And then obviously the closing skill is always going to be important, the ability to really gain commitment. Because we know a lot of the competition out there are going to be aggressive and proactive as well. So really being able to give the confidence to the client that they can close. And then lastly, I would say ambassadorship, because there's so much of that networking piece in media that's so critical. You've got to get out and about. You've got to let people know who you are, shake hands, eyeball people, and representing your brand with confidence, with enthusiasm, with energy. Being a good ambassador, getting out there is critical as well.
And I think, as we go into today's main topic, that's a really good baseline to come from, because when we're talking about presentation skills and we're talking about pitching and, persuasive pitching, I think you're absolutely right that those foundational skills, and it's really important that the audience actually acknowledge and kind of I'm not going to say self-diagnose, but are you more inclined to get out there and to create opportunity and drive new business, or are you more comfortable nurturing and growing a patch? Because naturally, the context of your presentations and your pitches are going to have to align to what you do best and what your core remit is. So, Brad, awesome start in the first 5. Let's jump into the main topic.
Media sales mastery.
So, this one's a simple one to start, Brad. What are the key attributes of a good presenter?
I would probably start with authority. When you think about authority, you're thinking about the level of conviction of really knowing your stuff. If you think about any time you've watched someone present, right, or pitch something, and there's a little bit of that doubt there, there's a little bit of that lack of real authority, and that's critical. So, and I think authority, there's that old saying, people might be naturally better at presenting than other people, but when it comes to authority, even looking at the word author comes out of the word authority. So that level of preparation, you've written things down, you've got clarity, you've practiced, you've got authority, because people want to be assured that you know exactly what you're talking about, because that's where they get confident that you're really going to offer them value. You're not kidding them, you're not, trying to wear a mask, you're not trying to make out you're someone that you're not, you have natural authority. So I would say that would be a key attribute to a very good presenter. Married with that is then authenticity, because I think, I know you're a big believer in this. Authenticity, it's attractive. I think particularly in the Australia culture, this culture of mateship, we don't like anything that's sickly sweet. So when it comes to authenticity, it's attractive. I was just thinking then, we're sitting on a couch right now, but the classic analogy of not being authentic, do you remember way back when Tom Cruise was announcing his love for Katie Holmes on the couch with Oprah?
And there was nothing behind the eyes.
No.
Despite what he was saying.
Exactly, right? And so the guy was trying to really sell the story, but he overdid it. He jumped up and down, he oversold it, and it became a PR nightmare. So I like to use that analogy as sometimes we can oversell it. Sometimes we're trying to push, or we're trying to persuade too strong, or we're trying to be over polished.
And with authenticity being so key, and you're right, I'm particularly passionate about this. I had an experience recently where I went and bought a new car a couple of years ago now, but it still stays with me. And I got the typical aftermarket kind of sales spiel that you get. And it just felt so inauthentic to me. And I suppose, look, 10 years in media sales, obviously I'm a little bit more discerning than your average consumer when it comes to being sold to.
Right, yeah.
But, you're right. With authenticity being so key to our success as media salespeople, how does someone sort of balance good presentation technique, being a polished presenter and rehearsing? How do they balance that with not losing in that their own personal style and their own unique approach?
Yeah, great question. I think that when it comes to that balance of having good technique but not losing authenticity, the philosophy I look at is many people would have heard of this before, but progress before perfection. So when I'm training people on how to present, I say, look, a lot of times we're told this lie that the more perfect you are, the more effective you're going to be. And what I say to presenters is, yes, you want to be technically good. Yes, you want to know your stuff. Yes, you want to have authority. But to protect the authenticity, to stay within your authenticity zone, understand that, you know, give yourself permission to be 3-dimensional, not to be 2-dimensional. What I mean by that is 2-dimensional is having the philosophy that everything has to be absolutely perfect and polished. But the reality is that you can be too polished. And so I think staying in your authenticity zone is very much around, you know, understanding that, you know, when you go to communicate, have some light and shade. So for example, if we think about art, you know, when you look at a good piece of art on the wall, you know, if it's got good light and shade, it has more depth to it. There's more authenticity to the piece of art, right? It's not surface level. The same is true with presenting or pitching. Give yourself permission to have some light and shade. So have some light-hearted moments. Have some serious, intense moments. Have some moments when you're willing to kind of have a little bit of a joke, you know, with the audience. Have some moments where you're going to bring some very strong, hard-hitting statistics. Have some balance. Because I think what happens is if we have this philosophy that to be great at presenting, everything has to be rehearsed to the point where we're robotically just saying something and it's so manufactured and so polished, it's too sickly sweet, right? And it's not able to be, I think, you know, when the audience is kind of, in a way, you know, eating what you're saying, they're buying in, they're swallowing what you're saying. If the flavor is too manufactured and too polished, it's not attractive. I think of another, you know, analogy this way. I say this to my daughters, actually. I have got a 2-year-old and a 5-year-old daughter. And I talk, you know, as a parent, as a dad, speaking words of life into them in terms of how they physically look. You know, I really say, you know, it's not about looking perfectly. It's not about, you know, actually it's the imperfections that make you attractive. It's the imperfections that actually are the core to, you know, the uniqueness of your beauty. And the same principle applies to presenting. You know, it's the moments of imperfection where maybe you're not so focused on reading the words, you know, scripturally. You're actually, you know, giving yourself an opportunity to, you know, create some light and shade, you know, telling that story, stop looking at the script, tell the story, engage the audience. Having these light and shade moments throughout it, I think helps people to stay anchored to the authenticity zone because people are getting a sense of who you are, your personality, your style, your heart. And when people can feel that, even though you've got, you know, we're not saying in being overly, in trying to be not overly polished, we're not saying don't be unprofessional, still be professional, still be excellent, but there's a difference between excellence and trying to be perfect.
And to me, that's the big piece is that the best presenters you see, you're right, there's something of a narrative that unfolds. There's a bit of light, there's a bit of shade, there's moments where they can take the PowerPoint off the screen and can just speak freely. And I think what's interesting though is, you know, having seen you present to a large group of people, those techniques, as media salespeople, the context that we're often selling into can range from a big group of people in a boardroom. Like there's no question that we have to do that. But then there's also context where it might just be sitting over a laptop at a desk with 1 to 2 people. Now, given that we have such a range there, can you talk a little bit about how presentation styles and techniques need to be altered depending on that kind of context? I
think the technique that I mainly use and I train people on in presenting is I use the analogy of a communications pie. Like I look at a pie like three parts of the pie. So the first part is the body language piece. And then the second piece is the vocal delivery piece. And then the third piece is the actual words that you use. So, you know, when it comes to adjusting your style, you know, if you're sitting down with 2 or 3 people, right, you've got to really read that, you know, how are they holding themselves physically? Is there quite a strong sense of conviction there and it's really intense, or are they kind of very, very laid back? And so you need to adjust even just the way you hold yourself with them when you're presenting. Also the vocal delivery, it's like the speed and the volume and the pitch, you know, the level of, you know, the people that you're speaking to, is it quite a monotone type of audience? For example, when I do presenting to a room of, I'm going to be very stereotypical here, okay? So I'm not trying to offend by being stereotypical, but we know there's always exceptions to the room. But to be frank with you, I'm more of a natural, you know, I inflect a lot naturally with my voice. I give lots of light and shade. But when I'm speaking to a room full of accountants and I'm presenting to accountants, right, I know I have to pull that back a little bit with my tonality and bring a little bit more of that straightforward, monotonous kind of sound to my voice, because that makes them feel more comfortable and they actually are more open to receiving from me. So when we talk about tonality, it is about reading the room and reading the audience, speed, volume, pitch, and then also, the words that you use. So for example, I know when I'm speaking to more of a flamboyant, charismatic style of audience, I'm going to use language that's a bit more energetic, a bit more flamboyant, larger words or adjectives.
Well, I've actually just had a question come to me on the fly. Let's say we're walking into a boardroom to present as a media salesperson. Maybe it's a contract negotiation. And let's say we've got the chief marketing officer, we've got the account director from the agency, we've got 2 or 3 other stakeholders in the room, maybe from the agency, and maybe we've even got an entire marketing team from the client side. When we are presenting to that room, we've obviously got a very diverse group of people in the room that are going to be receptive to different points, are going to be receptive to different styles, are going to have an expectation of probably you covering off the content in a way that's more palatable to them. Interesting to get your opinion on when you're going into a room with a very diverse group of people. What would be best practice in terms of having a presentation style that can actually resonate with that entire group?
Really good question. I found what works is, it's critical to really get a feel for who is the core leader. They may all be influencers, but who is the core leader in that room? And you need to identify that person. And the way to identify that person is sometimes really to ask an open-ended question before you even do the presentation. Say, hey, before we get into the presentation here, can I just reiterate one key thing before we get into presenting today? What is the most important thing for you as a team to get out of this presentation today, right? Just a really open-ended question that's powerful. Usually the person that steps up and answers that question is literally saying, hey, I'm the core decision maker, I'm the leader. Now, we know that all the other people in the room are going to be the influencers, but what you want to do is you want to read that person's, their style, their approach. Are they a high energy, task oriented person? So they're going to want to, they want to know specifically the results that you can give them in the solution that you're presenting. But also then reading the other room, getting a feel for the culture of the team, getting a feel for, in terms of their style and approach, you've got to look at when you're presenting, yes, engaging with the other people in the room. So what I would do is a top and tail effect. When I start the presentation, I would address the presentation more to that first key decision maker. And then as you get into the meat of the presentation, you start to work the room and you're engaging with other people and you're adjusting your style depending on maybe different personalities.
Who's giving you real-time feedback with eye contact, nods.
Yep. But then at the end, I would critically then also, as you're concluding, making sure that you are honing in on that key influencer, not ignoring the other people, but that's a strategy that I've worked before that's very effective. So you're engaging everyone, but you are putting emphasis in the top and the tail of the presentation with that key decision maker.
And that is a really good insight. And I think sometimes, what Brad's saying there, you're not breaking any rules by asking that question before you even kick into your official presentation. Sometimes being able to actually go into the room and find a way to get the political dynamic and to uncover that and to really ask 1 or 2 questions that are going to inform and govern your style. Now, granted, both of us have been presenting for well over a decade now. It's a skill that you have to learn over time. So when you go into the room, being able to pivot and adjust your style on the fly, it's not something that somebody a year to 2 years in would be expected to do. Before we wrap this topic up and jump into the next one, mate, I want to ask you one more thing. And this really struck me. We go to media conferences where we see a keynote speaker. We go to industry conferences. We watch TED Talks. We see really, really good presenters. We see that as best practice. And we go, okay, as a media salesperson, I really want to interpret and translate that presentation technique and style to what I do day to day. The fundamental difference that I think we don't call out enough is that presenting to entertain or presenting to persuade or presenting to sell are somewhat different things. Presenting to persuade might be something we do a lot. If we go in and do a boardroom update on, hey guys, we're here from this company. We want to give you an overview of a new initiative we're rolling out. But when you're actually going in to sell a media solution, presenting to sell and presenting to persuade and pitching, how would you suggest that the audience changes their presentation style to make sure that they're actually delivering on the objective of selling and persuading that audience to buy their solution?
Research shows that there's 3 critical ingredients that you want to inject into a presentation or a pitch if the key outcome that you want is a sale. And what we mean by a sale is we don't want to just educate or inform. We don't just want to inspire and motivate, but we want them to make a decision. We want them to be, getting to that buying decision, right? And so we know that psychology says that people buy with emotion first and they justify with logic second.
Yep, the old brain versus the new brain.
Exactly, right? Yep. So what I found really works is if people can understand these three core ingredients. I'm gonna get technical. I promised I would a little bit, but it helps people to remember because I'm gonna throw out three Greek words. Okay, the first one is called ethos, which really is the Greek word for ethics, and it leads to credibility. So if you want to sell when you present or you want to pitch, it's critical throughout your presentation. You have to inject a level of credibility, that level of trust that, okay, as the authority, as the expert, I know what I'm talking about. You can believe me. I've got credibility. You can trust me. And so, you can do that in all different ways. But I think a great way to take a step back and look at your preparation or, your practicing of a pitch or a sales presentation is, have I got enough in my structure here or my content that's creating a strong foundation of credibility? Will the audience see me as credible? And then obviously there's all different ways, that you can do that, but I think that's a great benchmark, credibility.
So ethos is number one?
Ethos is number one. Number two is pathos. And pathos is a Greek word that really is talking about the emotional angle, but it specifically is talking about storytelling. You talked about the narrative, right? We know that there's multiple teachings right now. There's multiple TED Talks right now around the importance and the power of story, purpose, the why, but if you can really make sure that you're using certain stories or analogies, illustrations, people mentally, when they can actually start to visualize a story and it relates back to their childhood, you get greater emotional engagement. But also what a story powerfully does, this is the benchmark. Your story should somehow get your audience to connect emotionally to either their core pleasure points, the things that they're trying to achieve, or their core pain points, the things that they're trying to get away from.
Right, so fear of loss or fear of gain.
Absolutely. So those core emotional things that people engage with, because that's ultimately the motivators. That's their buying criteria. So when you're presenting, you need to get them to connect to that afresh because it re-engages that emotional piece, right? But storytelling is such a great way of doing that. But also, it makes you as a presenter far more interesting. People who present can present so professionally, but if they don't have pathos, it tends to be a little bit like, oh, that was a bit boring.
Yeah, that didn't feel like it had a beginning, middle, and an end or a narrative.
Yeah, that guy or that girl, they were pretty good, but there was something there that was missing. And psychologically, subconsciously, we kind of know that something was missing as an audience member, but we don't necessarily know how to put our finger on it, and it's usually pathos. Now, the number three is logos. And that really just stands for logistics or the logical side, which is really about the facts, the figures, the statistics, the trends, the research, right? So that's, again, if I want to sell, yes, I have to have credibility in my presentation. Yes, I have to have good emotional connection, storytelling, the narrative, but I need to have some good logical facts, figures, statistics to back up what I'm saying. And that's the key.
So can I hear those three again?
Sure. So the first one is ethos,
yep,
pathos, logos.
Right. Sounds like a fraternity in an American college.
It does. Yeah.
I like that. I think that is a fantastic framework.
And I call it the DNA of persuasion. Those three, I call it the three strands of persuasion in a presentation to sell.
Mate, that's awesome. Well, look, we're going to jump into the next topic because I'm mindful we don't have you for much longer, but I think this is something we're going to have to get you back to talk about more, this topic, because I think we could go all day.
Sure.
I can't ask my sales manager that.
So I've got one that I've saved for you, Brad. It's from Danny in Sydney, and this is the question. And what we're going to do is we'll read the question, and then you and I might just kind of work it through in real time and see if there's any thoughts or suggestions we can give her. Okay. So the question is, I'm an agency business manager in Sydney. I can't share which company I work for, but we are a major publisher. One of my agencies always gives me glowing feedback about my proposals and how much they enjoy seeing me present. Despite this feedback from the agency, when the agency recommendation makes its way to the client, I rarely, if ever, get the same feedback around my proposal, and I find that I'm losing a significant amount of briefs, more than I'd expect, given the agency giving me good feedback. When my sales manager and I catch up for our weekly meeting, she always wants to know why I'm losing certain pieces of business out of this agency. I feel like I'm making excuses when I tell her about all the great feedback from the agency. I love the agency, but I worry that they aren't great presenters and aren't translating my proposal to the client. How do I manage my sales manager's expectations so she knows this is not within my control? So Brad, before I throw to you on this one, I guess agency sales is probably my specific area of specialization. I think that last question of how do I manage my sales manager's expectations, I actually don't necessarily think that's the problem. I think that there's an issue here with the presentation and the proposal not translating from the agency to the client. So rather than maybe giving you a managing up technique, I thought we could talk about some ways where we could make sure that if the agency are the custodian of that proposal and presentation, how do you better enable them to translate that concept to the client? What do you think?
Yeah, I think that's a great way to look at it. I think my first thought would be, because, my encouragement to this particular professional would be, first internally, see your sales manager as your coach. Okay, so my encouragement there, before we quickly tackle, what do we do in better partnering with the agency to make sure that proposal gets better translated to the ongoing client. See your sales manager as your coach, and so because of that, give yourself permission to be really upfront and honest and say, hey, look, this is what's going on. So bring the problem. Be a little bit more upfront around, look, I think this is what's happening. The proposal is not being translated as effectively. I'm getting good feedback. And rather than being fearful of that being positioned as an excuse, I would just, articulate the problem with more transparency. Be really upfront with how you feel and what's going on, but also bring a solution to the sales manager in the same breath and say, look, can we workshop this together? Right. So I think, first of all, relationally with the sales manager, it's about see them as the coach, and therefore see them that they generally want to empower you and support you. So go and, put the problem on the table, but come with ideas, come with a solution as well, and really invite the sales manager to workshop the ideas of, what can we do to turn this around, to improve, the working relationship with the agent. The second, my thinking is in relation to the agent, I would encourage, the professional, when workshopping it with the sales manager, that part of the solution may be really to actually organize a catch up with the agency, right? And say, hey, look, do the whole seek first to understand before trying to be understood. So maybe paint the picture and say, hey, look, thank you so much for giving me the feedback around how the proposals that I'm presenting to you as the agency are really effective. Obviously something that we're noticing from our end is that when they're being translated to the client, we're not winning the work. And so can I first get your perspective, Mr. or Mrs. Agency? What do you think is happening? Can you give us your perspective? What are you observing? What do you think is happening or not happening that's causing this kind of consistent result? I think that's just wisdom. Always get them to speak first, because we don't want to assume or presume, right? And then once we've kind of got that on the table, then I think it could be fruitful to then start to actually, again, workshop with the agency around what could be a solution. So potentially it could be actually suggesting, hey, we'd love, we see this as a partnership to strengthen the working relationship. Would you be open? I love that statement. Would you be open? Because it's very hard for people to say, no, I wouldn't be open, right? It's softer. It's more relational. Would you be open to the idea of potentially us maybe showing you how we present the proposal, maybe doing a little bit of workshop, showing you how we structure our presentation, so it comes across as persuasive as possible, where that maybe could give you some tips or some ideas, or maybe where you could refine, how you're presenting it, or even suggesting, or would you be open to the idea of leveraging off, us as the media expert and coming with you and doing some of the presentation with the client, because that way it's a win-win, because at the end of the day, you're still the agency, but you're bringing us as the expert in. We can position that as, it's a stronger team effort. That way we can actually leverage off our expertise, propose or pitch it exactly how we do it in front of you. And that way, if we win the work from that, then we're all winning. How does that sound? Would you be open to that? Could we trial that? I think that would be a great starting point. What are your thoughts, Jamie?
Yeah, no, look, I think that's a very comprehensive way of attacking the problem. And I think you're right. There's no sort of tactical solution here. It's really about just good communication. What I would say to Danny here is to actually think about the context of what the agency presentation to their client is. If you're coming in there with this beautiful 30-minute, beautifully designed deck where it's in your own style and you're presenting it really fluidly, and it sounds to me like you're a great presenter, what I would ask is, when they're catching up with the client, how much airtime does your part of the proposal actually get? When they're covering off every media, they're covering off a whole bunch of strategy, they're talking about budget allocations, they're talking about long wave opportunities. How much time does your solution actually get in the context of that? Because to me, what you've got to be able to do is very quickly find out how, if you are only getting 2 slides in that master presentation of the agency, how do you distill the essence of your concept down into something more palatable and more easily packaged? Now, some people call it a prop on a page, where you put your beautiful prop together, but then you give the nice executive style summary. The resource that I would suggest here, and I would actually suggest just listen to Brad in everything you said there and take that on board. But one of the resources that could give you an easy win, when you put together your presentation, go onto fiverr.com, see if somebody will build you a whiteboard explainer video. That is a really nifty tool that makes it really easy to retain control of what your message is, where you can write the script, you can have them have a beautiful piece of video content that is animated, and the agency literally, if they feel like it's a high enough production value, can press play and you can distill your pitch down into a nice 30-second digital version of what you do. Something to consider. But I think certainly from your point of view, how you suggested attacking that at the sales management level, at the agency level, and certainly if afforded the opportunity at the client level, was brilliant, mate. So thank you very much.
You're welcome.
So we're going to have to wrap it up, mate. I really want to say, I know that you travel, you've been in Thailand, you've been in New Zealand, you've been to countless other countries. I really appreciate you being here today to talk to us. I think if anybody listening wants to get in touch with Brad, knowing that you are a coach, you are a trainer, want to know, how can they do that?
Usually what I do is, particularly at this forum, because I love what you're doing, Jamie, and love the whole media industry. So, I'm really open to the idea of anyone who's interested. Usually I offer what I call complementary strategy sessions. It's just a great way for us to get together one-on-one. Usually I do it over a Zoom video conference. I get to know you, and we can really just look at your situation and kind of see, how can I help you, and if something kind of works from there, we can look at options. But I'll just give my email address, Bradford, so my first full name, Bradford at bradfordpower.com. If you just send me an email saying, hey, you heard the podcast and you're interested in a complimentary strategy session or just to connect, open to do that. And also, if you reach out to me via email, I can also connect you into some of my social media platforms. I've got a Switch on Your Sales group on LinkedIn, Switch on Your Sales group on Facebook as well, which is a great way to just, inject you into the community that we're building. But if you just, email me a message via that email, and we can go from there, that'd be cool.
Awesome, mate. Thank you so much for being here today, mate. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
So guys, don't forget to subscribe to the podcast. Leave a review on Apple Podcast. I've been listening to podcasts forever. I'm telling you, as a podcaster, it is so important that you give me 5 stars and you leave a review, because it helps this show get found. Something to do with the algorithm. One of the other things is head to MediaSalesMastery.com. Feel free to reach out to me. Email us your questions. If you want me to put you in touch with Brad, I can. But I'm really eager, and I think, Brad, you probably are too. We're eager to hear from you about topics that are going to help, provide some real value to you. So you pick the topics, you guide the show. This is your podcast. I want to make sure that what we do moving forward is very much geared towards people who reach out to us and want us to actually deliver content that is going to help them with pain points they're having in their career right now. So we're going to wrap it up this week. Brad, I'm sure you've got a plane to catch. Thanks for being with us today, mate.
Great. Thanks, Jamie.
You've been listening to Media Sales Mastery, the podcast for media sales professionals. Head to MediaSalesMastery.com to help pick the topic, guide the show, and don't forget to subscribe to receive new episodes each week.